In this video, I want to take a look at how we can make the edge of pavement, which is generated by the create template geometry property of a linear feature coming from the templates. We want to take a look at how we can make that not be seen in our intersection. And so the end result would look something more along the lines of this. Notice that I can make that edge of pavement through that intersection actually disappear, or basically be covered up by something that is the same color as the background. And also I put in some different settings for the fillets, and I made them red just so they stand out for demonstration purposes. When we do the work, we'll actually make them blue like the rest of the edge of pavement. But notice how there's no bleeding of this line, and it's a nice tight seam fit, and so that when you go to plot that, you won't have any issues, and your actual plot will be very clean. And so let's take a look and see how can we make this work. Before we actually get into modifying our civil cell to make this work, the first thing we need to talk about really is our template and how we can make everything beyond the edge of the pavement not draw through our intersection. One of the things that we've learned with placing of civil cells is right now, until we get to our 64-bit platform and do some optimizations with clipping, it's better to not let the civil cells actually clip our corridor if you have more than just one or two, because of just optimization of computer RAM. And so I'm going to show you a technique here that will give you a much more efficient means of taking away everything beyond that edge of pavement. So let's take a look at our template. We used, in this particular example, in the examples workspace, we used the two-lane urban curb and gutter with sidewalk. And in this template library, you notice this little point up here. If I right click on that and I test that point horizontally, as soon as I move it, all of the components that are beyond the edge of pavement are not drawn. Well, how did I do that? Well, first thing is, if we look at the properties of this point, I'm seeking a feature definition called match line up to 100 feet left. Also, on the curb itself, I have a component display rule called left match line. And if that left match line gets triggered, or if it finds that feature definition, it doesn't draw. And then lastly, every component beyond the curb is a child then of that curb and gutter. So with our template designed properly with the seeking of that feature definition called match line, all we simply need to do is draw a horizontal piece of geometry with that feature definition active. And you can see that I have match line active as my feature. And I'm just going to approximate a location right now. So we'll just draw it here. We'll move that line later. So we'll place that. And notice that nothing happens at this point. That's because we have to add that as a feature basically to the corridor that it seeks. Well, how do we do that? We select our corridor, in this case our north-south corridor. We're going to come over to our corridor references and we're going to add a corridor reference. And ask us then to select a line and then reset to complete. And you'll see instantly as our corridor processes, everything now beyond our proposed edge of pavement is not drawn. So before we can actually work on our civil cell, we need to make some adjustments to our levels and our element templates and feature definitions. So I'm going to go into our feature definitions DGN library here. So we'll open that up. And in our level manager, make sure that you have your level priority turned on, so you'll see your priority option there. And then what we want to do is we want to make a new level called road seam line, and we're going to set the color to match our background. That's very important. Make sure your style is set to 0, and the weight needs to be 3 greater than what it is you're actually placing or trying to cover up. In our case, we're covering up an edge of pavement, which is a weight of 2, so we want to set that to a 5. And basically what we're going to do with our priorities basically is to make sure that our edge of pavements are set to 300, our seam line is 400, and our center line geometry is 500. And that way things will line up properly. And so our seam line will be at a priority level of 400. And so that means it's going to be underneath our geometry center line, but it's going to be above our edge of pavement, and it's going to give us our masking effect. And so now we go down to our road edge of pavement. I want to change that to a priority of 300. geom centerline. That is indeed set to 500, which is correct. And we also have one called roadway centerline. And so here you see road centerline, and it's set to a 500 as well. Then the last thing that we need is to create a new level for our fillets. So I'm going to call it road edge of pavement fillets, and it's going to be the same color and the same weight as the rest of our edge of pavements. So on the road edge of pavement fillets, this priority needs to be higher than our masking, and so that's going to go back to a 500 for what we use on our fillets, so that that masking line, our seam line, does not cover those up. And so that will give us what we need to then adjust our civil cell. Now that we have our levels adjusted, we need to work on our element templates. And so I have, while still within this DGN library, I'm going to right click on this element template road edge of pavement. We're going to copy that and we'll paste it. And we're going to give this a new name. We'll go ahead and start with the fillets. And we want to pick that new road edge of pavement fillets, which is here. And then we're going to add a priority to that. So we're going to go back to our priorities, and we're going to set it to 500 as here as well. And so we'll set that to 500. And then on our normal road edge of pavement, let's go ahead and sort these alphabetically. So right click and sort children. So we'll have our road edge of pavement and our road edge of pavement fillets. I'm going to add a priority here to be consistent with our levels. And we set that one to 300. And then lastly, we need to make an element template for our seam line. So let's paste that in. Again, we'll sort children. Let's call this one seam line. And we'll select that level. Which is here. And then the seam line needs to be, if you remember, set to 400. And so that takes care of our element templates. So then the last thing to take care of in our DGN library is our feature definitions. And so I have those opened up. I've highlighted road edge of pavement. So let's make a copy of this. And we're going to paste it. And let's go ahead and rename that one to fillets. Give it a different prefix. And what we want to do here is make sure that you have your crate template geometry turned on. We do want that to be shown. And then we also want to change the element template that we're looking at. So remember, we made a new one here called Edge of Pavement Fillet. So I'll select that, and then I can just double click in here and copy. And we're going to put that same one in here. Okay, so we got that set. And then we need to make a new one also for our seam line. So there's our seam line. We will go ahead then on this one, we'll change to our seam line element template, which is here. Again, copy. And then that takes care of that feature definition. So now we're ready to open up our Civil Cell DGN library, and you'll see the path up here. I'm going to right click on T intersections and we'll do a copy, and then we're going to do a paste, and that's the file that I want to work on is the copy. So I'll open that up, and we're going to be prompted to convert that sometimes, and if you are prompted to convert it to SS4, go ahead and select yes to update. So let's go ahead and window in on the Civil Cell, this basic T that we're going to use as our example. And the changes here are very simple. We just select our seam, go to Quick Properties, and we're going to change our feature here to Road Seam Line. Then we're going to go to select our Edge of Pavement over here, and we'll go to its Quick Properties. And that's going to be our Edge of Pavement fillet, which is here. And we'll do the same thing over here. And that's all we need to do to our Civil Cell library. So let's jump back over to our design file and proceed to place our Civil Cell. So in our task, place Civil Cells. I'm going to reselect the basic T in our copied DGN library. There's our basic T. Okay. Select our secondary road centerline and our through road edge of pavement. And we need to reverse our references. Right click to reset, and then reset to complete. We don't want to clip, and accept. And immediately you're going to see that our edge of pavement is gone. And so if I turn off my construction class, you're going to see how nice and neat this looks. So it'll be perfect when we go to plot that. Then the last thing we really need to do is just fill in these gaps, which is very simple. We'll turn our construction class back on. And well, actually, two things we need to do. One is we need to adjust our cut line, or basically what we're using to not draw anything beyond the edge of pavement. And then we need to add key stations. I'm going to go ahead and move this. Of course, as I move it, the corridor is going to reprocess. And if you want to go ahead and not have it do that, you can select the corridor and go ahead and deactivate. And so now when I move it, it's not going to reprocess. And so let's go ahead and put this over here. I'm going to snap to, like I said, not the seam line, but the end of the fillet, and accept that. And then we'll do the same thing over here. I'm going to move this one. Again, I'm going to snap to the end of the fillet, accept it. And then we can go back to our corridor. And notice how that's covered up. And that's, to be expected. It is there. You can see it there. So we'll go back to our corridor, and we're going to turn on our rule. So this is what you would actually see when you move that line. And so what I did was I went to my corridor properties, and I went to add a key station here. And you want to be careful and not actually snap to anything. What I did was I zoomed in really tight and I put it just right against it. If you snap to it, it's going to actually become part of the fillet and it won't be picked up. It'll actually think that it's inside the intersection. And then we'll do the same thing on the other end. So we'll zoom in here. And again, just right off the end is fine. You can even literally be 1/100th off of the end of that fillet, and it'll look great. And so you can see there we got that result. And so when you take a look now at our intersection, let me turn off our construction class. It's nice and clean. And so if we go to, for example, plot this, and so we go to File, and we go to Print, and we print that as a PDF. You will see in this PDF file that the plot is perfect. You have absolutely no visibility of that match line through the intersection, or that edge of pavement through the intersection. The seam line is not visible, and it works out perfectly. And so the nice thing about this, once you have your environment set up, the user doesn't even have to think about it. They just place the Civil Cell and then they can send this to the plotter. The last thing just to point out here, I talked about this create template geometry feature, and so let's go ahead and just expand that just to reiterate that property. And so in our feature definitions, to get that line to actually draw, what we're talking about, if we can just look at the road edge of pavement, for example, or the fillets. In the linear default settings, it's this property right here. And of course, this would need to be set in your DGN-lib, but this create template geometry true, which you'll definitely want that on for your edges of pavements and your fillet edge of pavement, as I showed in the example here. Perhaps your shoulders, your curb lines, sidewalk lines, those types of things. And as your templates are dropped and your models are built, those plane graphics will automatically be placed as you see right here in my example.